Well, hey everybody, thanks for checking out our little video. Obviously, you stumbled onto this website somehow, so welcome to the Missions Collective. Really, the purpose of this video is just to show you how we all got started in our respective cities, kind of what God had put on our hearts, but then also the people that He had put in our paths together, and how we started to grow these gatherings in our own places. And then we started to think about, well, how could our experiences in our cities encourage brothers and sisters in other cities around the US and around the globe? Um, if you're interested in forming your own collective in your context. So we just want to share a little bit more about our background, where we came from, how we got to where we are. It is quite the interesting journey because I think, guys, you would all say that we've stumbled into this in some ways, and then we even stumbled across each other's paths too. And then at the very end, we just want to share a little bit about where do you go from here, and how are we going to be a resource to you going forward as you want to start a collective, anything around the mission of God in your context. So, first, my name's Ryan. I live in the metro Atlanta area. I'm joined by Alex in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and Grant, who is also in the metro Atlanta area, but unfortunately, we live on opposite corners of the city, so we might as well be in different states. Um, but yeah, Alex, why don't you just kick us off and let us know about your collective, where this journey started with you, and maybe is there even a difference of where the collective started, or is that all meshed into one story?
Um, all right, I'll give it my best. Although I feel like Grant's kind of responsible for the video happening, in his own. We had a cool divergence. So, um, I began doing some missions advocacy and mobilization projects, some of which was on YouTube and was always inspired by the YouTube videos that Grant and his team made. And one of the initiatives that myself and a team of us in the Fredericksburg area who had all been doing perspectives. They've been doing perspectives much longer than I had, we were from all different churches, Presbyterian, Baptist, Non-Denom, AG, and we love that perspectives brought together all these churches, over 20 churches, into any class. If you don't know what perspectives is, that would be another podcast for a different time. We love it. We're big fans. But we felt like there was more to be had. We can only had the bandwidth to like launch a perspectives about every couple years or so, and it would take us 6 to 9 months of planning. And then after perspectives, there was that gap, and we were all looking at like how do we move the needle further in mobilization? This idea of advocating, but also advocating, by the way, for like for missions, for missionaries to go, emphasis on unreached people groups, people who had no access to the gospel, unless or little to no access unless others would go, and then inviting people to go. So advocacy and mobilization on that side, and we felt like we needed to provide another outlet beyond a 15-week kind of class that was high commitment, costly, took a ton of time to plan. We needed to provide another outlet that was the barrier to entry was really low. It was frequent enough to where people missed one, they could make it, not have to wait another 2 years. Still collaborative in that it would connect with churches across our city of all different backgrounds of denominations, and continue to advocate for missions and helping people learn what missions is and giving exposure and attention. And we knew some churches, like, they just didn't have a missions pastor. Like, they didn't even know where to begin. That kind of hit me on the head one time when I talked to a recent church plant in our area, and I was talking to the pastor's wife who's on staff, and we were talking about missions and what they do, and inviting them to be a part of something like the Fredericksburg Missions Collective. And she just said, "What is unreached?" And just had no idea. There were still people who had never had heard the gospel or access to the gospel globally. So then came the brainstorming of, well, what does this look like? How do we come together? What do we do? And Missions Collective, which God, I believe, in this part of the story, was stirred in other people's hearts, was the name that we came into. That just like, what are we? What are we about? We're from all different churches. We know it is God's heart for us to collaborate and get over our differences theologically, for the sake of moving the needle in missions and working together. And the task is huge. Like, it's going to take the church working together to accomplish something that's so big and so daunting these days. And so we founded the Fredericksburg Missions Collective, and then we began to do. Well, let me hit pause there because we're kind of in story mode before what we do and how we do it. Is that a good pause point? What do you
Yeah,
think,
that
Ryan?
sounds great. No, because I was going to say we've probably got a lot of things that we can jump off of with how specifically it's done in your area because it does look a little different with you guys, and even who's involved in Fredericksburg right now is a little different than Atlanta. But I think what we're hoping is those are going to converge. So yeah, Grant, why don't you give a little bit of background because before we were the Atlanta Missions Collective, we were a couple of different things, and I know you and your organization were kind of at the forefront of that.
Yeah, so Global Frontier Missions, we have a core value that's kingdom minded. I mean, we love working across the body of Christ, across denominations, across organizations. We're headquartered here in Atlanta, and there's a lot of other missions organizations that are here as well. We've got Operation Mobilization, we've got Cafe 1040 and Compass World Partners, Africa Inland Mission, TMS Global. We probably have a dozen missions organizations that have their headquarters here. So he said, hey, we need to hang out more often. And specifically, we wanted to pray more often, just get out of our silos, get into God's presence, and get on our knees and ask the Lord of the harvest to send laborers into the harvest field. So we started out as ATL to UPG, Atlanta to Unreached People Groups, just a monthly prayer gathering, pretty much praying for diaspora, the unreached people groups that are coming here as refugees, international students, immigrants, and also praying for countries and people groups all over the 1040 window where our different organizations are involved. We did that for a few years, and then we started going to the mobilization ideation, which is something Missio Nexus does in several different cities. Atlanta was one of the locations, and it tended to draw a lot of the mobilizers from different sending organizations. So a lot of those guys said, hey, we like to getting together with other mobilizers, and we want to do this more than once a year. So ATL sort of morphed into an Atlanta mobilizers huddle. I know there's another one in Dallas and some of those other places. So for a while, it was really a lot of the mobilizers from these sending agencies in Atlanta to come together to get tooled up, best practices, encourage one another, have a meal together, and again, praying for the nations as well. But we tended to mainly get the organization folks that already get missions. We always wanted it to be local church centric. We wanted more missions pastors. We wanted more lay people. I mean, we really want to see a missions movement happen in Atlanta, as many disciples, as many churches involved in the Great Commission as possible. So we're always, God, how can we pray more for the nations? How can we give more to the nations? How can we mobilize more people? How can we send more laborers short term, but especially long term from the Atlanta area? So that's when one of my staff members sent me a video from Alex and said, check this guy's YouTube video out. Like, he's a good mobilizer. We need to hang out with this guy. So got on a Zoom call, chatted with Alex, learned a little bit more about their collective, which is much more local church centric, kind of built around a lot of the people involved with perspectives, coordinators, many different local churches involved. So yeah, we've just been throwing ideas back and forth to figure out how to have not just the mobilizers from missions organizations in the city come together. That's been a great thing, but we want it to be larger than that. We want it to be the body of Christ and come together and see how can we serve one another, resource one another, encourage one another to see like a true movement in the Atlanta and beyond area for Great Commission involvement to see folks serving among those 7,000 unreached people groups.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I think it's kind of even prompting some questions in my mind that maybe we can address these a little bit later on. But some of the obstacles and challenges of the goals of each of these collectives in these cities, and what are some things that we're even trying to overcome in Atlanta versus Fredericksburg together. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about how these two entities that started on their own really kind of started to interact with each other. And Alex, when we first met you, you had mentioned this concept of a collective had been put on your heart. And I think the collective started, was it right around like 18 months ago from the point of this recording anyways? Does that sound about right?
I'm gonna say yes, but
Okay.
I don't remember.
That sounds about right to me in our conversations, but I thought it was interesting because Grant and I have a little bit of a nerdy hobby that we found out we share together. And that's if we come across an interesting domain name that we're like, oh, maybe we could use that one day, we'll click on it because $10 a year is not a large investment for something that could turn into something really cool.
Yeah.
So 3 or 4 years ago, I bought this domain name that sounded like, oh, that might be fun. It's called missionscollective.com, which is how you've even found this video now. And we're just sitting on it. And then Grant, you got connected with Alex and you guys start talking and you guys are already called Collective. And Grant and I and a couple other folks had talked about shifting from a mobilizer focus to something broader. So why don't you guys talk a little bit more about those initial conversations and how it's now we've springboarded into collaborating together. Alex, do you want to take the first crack at that on what those conversations look like as we discussed, could we put our heads together?
Sure. I mean, as you mentioned, Grant reached out to me because he'd seen some of the missions projects that I've been working on. I shared about Fredericksburg Missions Collective, and I think we were like, when you and I first started talking, Grant, the team and I, we were just trying to figure out like, how do we make a name, a brand, a mission statement. For anyone listening, we spent an exorbitant amount of time in whittling down and redoing a mission statement that would work across many denominations. Because that's what we're bringing to the table, and people who
Anybody that has ever crafted mission statement knows that it just takes too much time, no matter. So
it was crazy. And you have people on our team that they were veteran missionaries in Turkey and Afghanistan and Japan and Central America and pastors locally. So anyway, so came together, like, what are the values? What do we feel like help us keep on track? And then when we launched this thing, we started doing the events. We also put on the website of like, hey, launch your own collective. And in my mind, I was like, well, maybe it takes off into like Charlottesville or Richmond, some of the surrounding cities around us. Like I just was like, why wouldn't we make this accessible? Why not limit it? And that was really kind of like hit pause on thinking growth and just, we have a ton of work to do in Fredericksburg. I wanted to see, for anyone listening, if you're not, I don't know, traveled on the like Atlanta is clearly a missions hub with all these missions agencies. There's these hotspot cities across the United States, Colorado Springs, Lancaster, Atlanta, where we're doing really amazing at sending out missionaries, and a lot of the churches get the urgency for missions. And there's cities like Fredericksburg where it's like I know of very few missionaries who've ever been sent out, and we want to bring out vision for that. And so Fredericksburg Missions Collective is that local initiative to see Fredericksburg become that kind of city where we're sending city. And then the Missions Collective idea, as Grant and I were talking, and I should hand off to Grant here, was like, well, could this be a vehicle that other people and other groups have the same vision could use in their cities? And I think, Grant, you've actually had way more vision and been inviting Ryan and I into that vision for that. So, yeah, take it and run.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of trial and error. We've been trying this thing for about 10 years, at least in Atlanta. You guys have been going for a couple years. So I feel like we've learned things along the way that could help other cities get up and running. When I started chatting with Alex, I was like, man, you've got some really good giftings in marketing, putting Facebook ads together and social media stuff, building websites. Like, would we be able to tap into your talents and use some of your marketing? You've already designed logos, you've designed websites, you've marketed, and you guys have actually put on a few events already in Fredericksburg. You told me some that went well, some that didn't go so well. Every time you do one, you learn something more about the food or the childcare or the timing or what days work better. And I was like, man, we could learn from you guys because you've done a few of those things already. Here's some things that we've tried in Atlanta. Don't make the same mistakes as us. Or you know what? Some things need to be changed context by context or city by city. So, Alex and I just started bouncing ideas off of each other, and I was picking his brain and stealing his ideas for a upcoming event that we wanted to use in Atlanta. I said, hey, will you check out our website and our marketing? Could you help me? Could I steal one of your Facebook ads and make a couple tweaks to it, and we can use it for ours? And it was just this cool kingdom collaboration. And I was like, I bet there's places or people in other cities that would also like to tap into this, and we could do some shared learning together, or maybe we could help people get started in new cities that maybe have no marketing background or have never built a website or don't even know where to start with coming up with core values or a mission statement or crafting the meeting or starting to networking. So we were like, what would happen if we could just make our tools as simple and reproducible as possible, get them on the website, help equip and tool people that want to do this type of thing in their cities. So
Yeah. And on that note, the goal has been to then build something that we can replicate easily. It's lightweight, reproducible, If somebody wants to have, everything that we've done and created, and even website, we can replicate it quickly. How do we help someone launch, their city name, Missions Collective, using everything that we've learned, everything that we have in their own way, and let them run, so they don't have to do all the work that we did and reinvent the wheel. Yeah.
Well, before we jump into some of the challenges, I want to kind of give a little bit of help people better understand what the collective actually looks like to be involved in each of these contexts, because I think there's an assumption that, okay, if we want to start a collective, just like what we're seeing on this website, there's just a universal formula. And there may be universal principles that we're aiming for, but let's talk a little bit about what it looks like to actually be involved in the collective, practically engaging in terms of your rhythms for events. I know those have been mentioned a few times, and collaboration has been mentioned. So, Alex, why don't you talk first about Fredericksburg? What does it look like for members of a collective to be involved in each other's lives and ministry and meeting and events on a regular basis? And then, Grant, I'll let you fill in what Atlanta looks like from your standpoint.
Yeah. So once we got through the launch phase of building this out, we shifted to meeting less frequently. And so now our team, we meet every third Thursday. That's just it's on our calendar. And so every third Thursday we meet up, and it is a logistics planning meeting that we do as a team, and prayer. And we've been working on creating more of we kind of know the events that we like and feel like work and have greater potentials. We're doing better. And that probably would maybe be something that maybe is more of a secondary thing that we get into in other videos of as we coach people, if they want to use what know what we've done. But those events are usually inviting everybody. There's food, there's guest speakers, maybe there's prayer. And so there's anyway, we do a quarterly event. And that gives us time to meet monthly on the third Thursday evening is when we do it. And then, we have about 3 months of planning and logistics and working through what is our next event, who's speaking, what does it look like, feel like, where, all the logistics, keeping it simple. And then also planning on kind of the marketing side of how are we making it visible online, what churches are we inviting, what are our goals. And so, yeah, quarterly events is our goal. Right now we kind of hit pause because we have another perspectives class going. I helped with the coordination team, but I'm not coordinating. We're doing perspective this time around, and probably 80% of the Fredericksburg Missions Collective team are coordinators. And then after this perspectives class happens, the cool thing is then a month later, we have our Face of the Frontier event. And so we'll invite all of them, but also, invite the entire city is our goal, and continue to try moving the needle. So, yeah.
Cool. So what does Atlanta look like, Grant?
So yeah, we're sort of shifting right now because we went from this Atlanta mobilizer huddle model, which was mainly the mobilizers at different organizations. So that was giving a lot of tools to mobilizers, how to do a conference well, spiritual vitality, how to not be discouraged as a mobilizer. But now that we're shifting and trying to be much more local church centric, we're trying to have more topics that engage local church, how to do member care well for our people that are on the field, how to do intelligent short-term mission trips, when helping hurts type principles. One was just a prayer meeting, how to pray well for the nations and start prayer gatherings that people actually want to attend and come to. So yeah, right now we meet every month. We have a meal together. We want to fellowship and break bread and just do life together for a little bit. And then there's usually a topic that we're wrestling with just to be able to take back to our home churches. As we've been hanging out with the Virginia guys, we're starting to do more event planning as well. So we all work together to pull off a big event in January called the Explore Gathering. I think in May, we're going to try to do a one-day Taste of Perspectives event to get more people excited about the Perspectives course and hopefully signing up for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're trying to put speakers and information and iron sharpening iron questions in front of one another to help ourselves grow as mobilizers, to get new ideas to implement in our church, and maybe even to find out some partnerships and collaborations of a few churches working together for the Japanese or the Turkey or the Uyghur people, or praying more together, maybe even combining and doing short-term mission trips together. But yeah, the ultimate goal is we definitely want to start looking at Atlanta sort of as our mission field, the mission field of Christians, that we're trying to get the message out about God's heart for the nations and get more people involved. So, yep, our rhythm is once a month, food, topic, and starting to see maybe 2 or 3 events that we're organizing each year, working together, collaborating on that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I hope what people are catching is that in all of this and in both cities, the heartbeat is the exact same, but the way that that heartbeat starts to look in these different contexts is completely different because of who's involved and even the organizations that are involved. So it could be these larger, gatherings every so often versus the monthly topics and those types of things that are really digging into kind of the felt needs of the moment, or some really practical tools and resources. It varies because of who the Lord has brought into each of these collectives. But Alex, I just out of curiosity, as you guys have, kind of formulated this thing and you've got some structure around it now, what are some of the challenges or obstacles you've come across in terms of getting buy-in to a collective or getting regular ongoing participation, or just sharing of ideas and collaborating on things that actually bear fruit and they're not just great little think tanks? And Grant, likewise too, if you've got other things that are immediately pop into your head, what are some obstacles you've mentioned? There's a lot of organizational focus in Atlanta, and we're trying to get more local churches and some obstacles to that even. So really for either one of you, I guess. But Alex, if anything pops in your head right away, go ahead and take it.
Yeah. One challenge for us is just anytime we're putting on an event, like, or doing all this work and effort, we want people to show up. And so we're still learning as we go as to like what are the methods that get the greatest return on investment, as far as like, do we do marketing ad spend? Do we do email newsletter? Do we go and, cold call or door knock on churches? And so kind of that's still something that we're learning. And I think we're kind of at the like all of our whole group is like, hey, we would rather try this and even have a small turnout than not be doing this, because we know that we're supposed to be doing something and mobilizing. So I think that's important. And even if just our small group of people who, our team of like 8 or 9, even if it was just us and we come together to pray, like that for us is a win, because it's prayer that otherwise probably isn't happening for those who haven't heard the gospel. That being said, we've had events that have 70 people and events that have 120 people. And so with that in mind, challenges, that's one, is just attendance, and realistic expectations, and then also having a lot of grace that this is a hard endeavor, and there's going to be resistance. And for some, it is just they don't know how to, collaborate with people outside of their denomination. They don't know how to collaborate with people outside of a different church. And you start asking them, and they're like, their first question is why. And then for others, like, we've had pastors who said like, hey, that, they felt like it was, encouraging people to church hop, because our goal is to do something together as churches. So I think there's challenges might be around like church culture, church mindset. And so ways to combat that we've kind of figured out is like making it accessible to everyone. But it tends to be that just online visibility through social media and things like just doesn't seem like that seems to add to, but what really seems significant is that relational component of getting to know people, and personal invitations and getting to know other churches and other pastors. That relational buy-in we've noticed is very important and integral to doing a better job at our goal of creating a collective and creating something together that's bigger than ourselves and our city towards this. And then also we found that you probably the more people that you have from a church on your core team, the better your events together are going to be in terms of size. And that's something that's actually kind of newer that we're like, oh, like if we want to have more churches here, which we do, because there's a lot of churches that just don't, like, there's so many churches now that don't have a missions pastor. They don't have the bandwidth to have a missions pastor. They might have a missions committee. Maybe they don't anymore. Like a lot of church plants don't have this stuff. And a lot of the church plants are where the young people are, so there's all these things to consider. And so there's a lot of value that we can do together in helping one another. But it's going to take some relational work. And then if we can invite people from those churches to join us in doing this together instead of just attending, but actually be a part of the conversation and making it happen, I think we're going to see better results. That's been kind of one of the more eye-opening, strategies, if you will, of like, people feel way more comfortable being a part of what we're doing if they actually know us, not just hear from us.
Well, I got to tell you, those obstacles and challenges with church culture and collaboration, that's unique to Fredericksburg. We don't have those issues in Atlanta.
Right.
Thank God. It's encouraging.
Yeah. Yeah, Grant, what would you say some of the major challenges have been, whether it's through the Atlanta Collective or even the previous iterations as the mobilizers or the prayer group, the Atlanta to Unreached People?
Yeah, so some of the challenges working with mobilizers, that's sort of their job, and that's what they're on staff at these different organizations to do. So a lot of times they're running all over the country for conferences and going to Christian colleges and stuff like that. So commitment on the agency side of things has been difficult at times. John Maxwell, his laws of leadership, one of his is laws of magnetism, which basically says you attract what you are. So because we're a bunch of mobilizers from organizations, I think churches came and felt a little bit like outsiders. So we're working really hard to shift that culture. We meet during the day right now, so that works really nicely for people that are on staff with the missions organization or on staff with the church, because you sort of get to count that as your work hours. You get to double dip a little bit being a part of this collective. So a missions pastor, church pastor, mobilizer with an organization can come, and that's part of their job. But man, are we cutting off all of the lay people in the city and the missions committee volunteer? Do we need to start looking at evening meetings to is that one of the reasons we can't attract as many church people, because it's during the day? Yeah, so those have been a few of the challenges. One thing that's unique to us, we've talked about it several times, Atlanta is so huge. I mean, it takes an hour and a half to get from one side of the city to the other. So it's a full day commitment to come to our collective meetings. So do we need to make them more virtual? Do we switch to Zoom? A lot of people like the life on life component and breaking bread together. We've talked about chopping it up into regions. Do we need like 3 or 4 different collectives in Atlanta where we've got the Northeast or the Southeast folks coming together? So those are a few of the challenges and things that we've wrestled through in a big city like Atlanta.
Yeah, well, and I know in our conversations, Grant, we've even mentioned maybe it's us making assumptions on people, which we do, but could it be a group of organizations and agency folks trying to bring churches in? Are churches feeling like, are they going to bait and switch me? Are they trying to sell me something? Are they going to hit me up for money or make me take on everything that their organization is trying to do? But I'm curious, have you felt that sense from churches, or is that maybe something that we as agency folks and parachurch organizations have invented?
I mean, we've done a few panels as a part of our collective, getting several pastors together and say, hey, could you speak honestly? We want to learn from you guys as pastors, missions committee leaders. Can you speak to us agency people? And they did actually confirm a little bit that sometimes they feel like when the agency walks in the door, they're coming for your money and they're coming for your people. I mean, missions organizations have a reputation for either sheep stealing or just going in, what can we get out of you, rather than how can we invest, how can we give, how can we resource. So we're trying to have these open dialogues with agency people in the room and local church people in the room and say, hey, how can we do this well? How can we build trust? Because agencies also have their biases and prejudices against the American church and stuff like that. So we've had some really good dialogues going back and forth. But yeah, I don't think it's just assumptions. We've heard some pastors say, yeah, there are some times, and we need to repent to you guys. You guys need to repent to us, because we have had some attitudes towards the agencies because we feel like they come into town and they want to do an overhaul of the way we do evangelism or the way we do church planting or the way we do missions. And they're coming and they need their dollars to be able to send to their unreached people groups, or they don't really believe in local church centric sending structures and missions. They want us just to give our people to them and outsource missions. So we've had some really great dialogues. It's been really helpful for a lot of our folks to have those type of conversations together.
Well, it's interesting, like what you're talking about there. I think there's a direct parallel with what you shared, Alex, of churches wondering, is this going to encourage people to church hop and those types of things? So, how have you in Fredericksburg tried to really demonstrate practically the spirit of collaboration, this kingdom mindedness, like Grant, you said, is one of your organization's core values, and really helped other people experience a spirit of collaboration within the body, without being territorial.
We're still working at it.
Yeah.
So I would say, in addition to what, I'm going to answer your question. I want to give one other, there's other challenges. And some churches, they just already have the missions things that they want to do, and they're just not interested in anything else.
Yeah.
And so that as well is another one of like, I'm not sure how we overcome that yet, outside of like, we just need to build a relationship with them. So they see the value in this. And so when we think about your question, I think what we're looking at doing about it is like, because we have some people on our team who are pastors, that actually like having him lead something with other pastors, and helping them see what the value of it is and making it clear and setting expectations. One expectation that we were working at is, we told the last person who came to the event, who was from Turkey, doing some really cool things in Turkey, like, this is not a fundraising event. We don't want you to fundraise. And so I guess that could be kind of harsh to tell a missionary from a closed country who's coming to speak, but like, the goal was, I want you to come and share stories. I said, I want you to like, your goal is to like win everyone in the room, like over to feeling like called to go at, or take action, do something. But like with story. And so I think, making clear expectations, because the fundraising thing, the support raising thing does seem to be in this collaborative venture is the area of distrust or insecurity, across organizations and churches. I think that's something just to be really clear about, and have boundaries and say, hey, we don't do support raising and fundraising at these events. It's not what this is. This is for the sake of advocating for and mobilizing. And so some of that is creating awareness, educating. But I think we've got to show. I think we have to show the value that we're bringing, because if we want churches to work together collaboratively, they've got to see how this supports one another and doesn't feel like it's constantly pulling from each other. So I think that's an area that we're working at, and that we as a team are prayerfully saying, like, how do we bring value, and what are expectations, what are boundaries, and being clear about those in the events that we do and how we do it. And then when we're talking to church leaders and pastors, making these things clear is a way that we're working at it.
Awesome. Yeah. I think expectations are key. So in terms of somebody who's interested in starting up something like these collectives in their own context, I think it'd be helpful to even check what their own expectations are. Grant, I know you said your Atlanta group, the one that I'm now a part of, started as Atlanta to Unreached People Groups, which was specifically centered around praying together. That's all it was. Was that well attended?
Unfortunately not. I wish we could get people together just to pray, but it usually takes more than that. Usually takes
Yeah.
a meal, takes what value is getting added to me or my ministry or my church. So, and we've sent out so many surveys over the year. We're constantly reevaluating what's bringing you guys here. What do you want more of? What's been helpful? What will make you come to this, make that hour drive across Atlanta to come to this? So we're constantly soliciting feedback. And that's why the group has evolved, because during different seasons, different people are saying, but I just really need community. I feel like I'm the only one at my church that really gets it. I feel like I'm swimming upstream all the time. I'm the only one that's excited about Jesus being exalted among the nations. So I look forward to this every month just to be around other people that get it, and I don't feel so lonely. Other times people have been like, you know what, I've got a lot of fellowship. I'm part of a missions organization. All we ever do is talk missions. I like it because I feel like I get some resources and tools. It gets me out of my silo and my normal organization where we have our little issues, and going and hearing another organization's issues or what a local church is wrestling through, or we bring together a case study and work through it together. It like jogs my memory or gives me some creative ideas to take back into my context. We've had a few folks that said it just helps me to stay focused on Jesus and being kingdom minded, because I'm very tempted all the time to build my own kingdom, whether it's me personally or my little organization or my church. So some people have done it just out of a spiritual discipline of once a month I get out of my little bubble and I go and I work with the greater body of Christ, and it reminds me how big Jesus is, how great and awesome his bride is. So yeah, we've morphed over the years based on seasons that God has brought us to, the group that God has together at any given time. So we've been pretty flexible, seeing what the needs of our community is.
Well, in full disclosure, I was not involved in the Atlanta group when it was a prayer only
Yeah.
gathering. I didn't find out about it. I think it was until after the pandemic and you guys had already shifted to the mobilizer thing. But um, I think one of the other expectations that we've run into as well is we can come up with all these ideas and topics and resources of things that we would want to share, but we found ourselves having to ask the question after about a year of at least my engagement in the mobilizer huddle, are we asking the right questions? Are we pointing people to resources that they're actually looking for?
Right.
Are we addressing the challenges that they actually have, or are we just inventing them in our minds? And in no way does that diminish the need for prayer. It's one of the things that, as we've talked with you, Alex, that gathering together and praying together has to be central to what we do. But Grant, we've also talked about there's lots of different ways to mobilize people, and we want to mobilize people into prayer. That is primal. Um, but if we're only doing that, are we missing other ways to mobilize people? And then even in terms of the fundraising thing, Alex, if we are only trying to mobilize people into giving to support the work that God is doing in other places, those are good things, but are we missing people? So maybe you can share just some practical ways that you've seen incorporating other avenues of mobilization has made your group, your collective, or just your own ministry outside of your organization or your church more effective or strengthened by saying, hey, maybe we need to incorporate some of these other mobilization pieces.
Um, Having been a missions pastor and having been also previously a long-term missionary for over 6 years, I feel like the ways my hope is that what we're doing for Expert Missions Collective is that way. Through some kind of semi-regular collaborative multi-church event that educates, inspires, and calls to action. So I want to give you a good answer, but my hope is, because I'm kind of in the, like, I'm tired of spinning my wheels and wasting my time. And I see that there's so much to be done, and I want to look for what's moving the needle. So we've done a prayer event, and we want to continue. We'll probably annually do a prayer event. But even churches have a hard time getting people to come out to a prayer event.
Right.
And so, and also, like, the people that you're probably wanting to mobilize, or even, like, mobilization is probably a multi-stage thing. Like, I've heard estimates that take 7 years for the average person to get to the field from when they feel God's call. And so I think we can do it a lot faster than that. But, like, I just think, some people are the people that, like, need this invitation who've not yet heard it yet. So here, let me put this on the thing. Like, where I live and in my setting with a lot of the churches that I support with discipleship resourcing and have spoken at and things, I had this kind of realization that I believe to be true, which is that in most churches, an individual has probably not heard an invitation from the platform during the main message by their lead pastor to consider being a long-term church planting missionary. And I feel like I wish that that was the case in every church every year, that from their lead pastor there would be a not like a missions, what is missions, a stated missions message, and an invitation for people to consider, pray about going. And then if they don't feel called to go, here's these other ways that you can take action. I think that that's an essential thing that I would love to see come into ordinary, regular church pattern and life from leadership in churches. And so because of that, I think that invitation is very effective, and we're praying, but also like Jesus, expects us to engage. So it's like pray for laborers to be sent because ours is plentiful, but then he also told his disciples to go and make disciples. And so there's this like praying and going. And so my hope is that like we're praying, looking for opportunity, but this is also this like those of us that feel this urgency and this call to mobilize, this is this way that we can do it, and the going and helping invite people to go, because people are just lacking an invitation. And so then when we consider that, it's like, well, who's lacking the invitation? The hard part, I think, for us who are kind of like missions nerds is we tend to attract other missions nerds. Well, they probably have already been praying about going, and for whatever reason, they know they're not supposed to be going right now. Like myself, I'm like, I care deeply about this, but I don't feel like God's telling me to go. I feel like I'm actually supposed to, like, if I'm here, it's mobilizing. So then how, and then who's my target audience? So I think for us missions nerds, it's like, how do we not create something that would attract other missions nerds? Right. How do we create something that would hopefully attract people who've not yet really considered missions or ever been invited into missions? And then now we're talking as a team with our events, with perspectives, like what does it look like for us to take on more of a discipleship role in missions collaboratively, like assisting churches, but the people who come to this who say, yeah, I want to go, like really giving them an invitation. And then what does it look like for us to maybe, if they don't have a plan or person in their church to help them get to the field, what does it look like for us to be very intentional about from a kind of a discipleship perspective, helping them get to the field? And it might even be helping people find an internship, helping them do, maybe our team is going to host a short-term trip to the Arab world later this year. And we want to do this with local churches, 100%. But also God's put this on our heart. And if he's leading people to us that do feel that call to go, how do we be faithful with that and good stewards? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's some of the thoughts that come to mind.
No, it's good. I think part of the challenge, and not just having a bunch of the missions nerds together, and that old adage of you're just preaching to the choir. I mean, there's a reason that exists.
Yeah.
But getting some of those people that, for lack of a better term, are on the fringes, at least of missions engagement in any one of the ways that we're trying to mobilize, whether it's through praying, whether it's through giving, whether it's through going, or whether it's welcoming, is finding some of those really tangible things that people can put their hands on and say, oh, this is very helpful, whether it's because it's directly related to their work that they're doing as a vocation, or whether it's because of the relationships that they're already starting to form, but they don't know how to make them even more intentional. So all that to say, I think this is a good segue. We're going to find out if it's a good segue, but in terms of, we hear about what's happening in Fredericksburg. There's a group of churches that are already missions minded. You got the Perspectives Network. So you kind of have this built-in community that you didn't know was there, but was already formed to start a collective. And then Grant, you've mentioned there's a dozen or so large sending organizations in the Atlanta area. So there's this culture of mobilization already here. But what about the person who's watching this video and they're in a small little town where there's not a lot of other organizations, if any, and including churches in that, to collaborate together? Or they're in a context where it may be a huge city, but the footprint of the church is incredibly small. And they're like, well, there is nobody else to collaborate with. There is nobody to meet with. I'm just curious how each of you would encourage that person. You've already mentioned even just kind of shifting to a discipleship mindset, Alex. But what would you say to that person who's like, well, we're not going to have an event of 70 people, let alone 120, and I don't even think I can get 10 people in a room once a year.
You want to go first, Grant, or do you want me to?
Sure. I mean, I encourage people to look at their local city as if they were going into the mission field. So we take a lot of church planting movements and disciple making movements, principles that we teach in the missions world, and then we try to apply it to a Christian context. So instead of trying to figure out where are the lost spots or where are the villages that don't have Christians, we're kind of trying to look at a city and figuring out what God is already doing there with the Christians. And so, when you're doing church planting movement, disciple making movements, you kind of do like oikos maps or friendship maps or social networks. So you just start looking at your city and who are the people that you already know? Who are the Christians that you already know in town? Because they've got billboards or you hear their stuff on the radio, or a Christian teacher at work goes to that church over there. I know that somebody has a small group. So you just sort of start mapping the Christian world in your city and start asking around what churches send mission trips, what churches support missionaries. And you just started connecting the dots and networking with what God is already doing there. Because even if you feel like you're in a small city, as you go on the mission field, it's like God was at work on the mission field even before the missionaries got there. God is at work in small towns and in small churches before we get in there to set up a missions collective. So I would just ask people to be prayerful, map out the Christians that they already know, and then start doing some investigation on Google. Start looking denomination-wise. Where are the Baptist churches? Where are the Methodist churches? Where are the Presbyterian churches? Where are the charismatic churches? Like, what are the churches in the area? And then you can even start, either cold emailing or calling and saying, what do you guys do about missions already? I have a heart for missions, and we're trying to get churches to work a little bit better in this community, and seeing if somebody would want to come together for prayer, or if we occasionally had a missionary come through town, we want to share that missionary with the other churches as well. That's one of my hearts for these collectives, is the small churches that don't have a lot of resources or people, or they're not connected. The larger churches in the city, or the ones that are a little further along missions minded wise, can help the smaller churches and say, we've got this great missionary to Turkey or Japan coming through town. We would love to share them with you while they're in town, or if you guys want to come to our gathering, hey, we know that you're a really small church and it's going to be a lot of work for you guys to organize a mission trip down to Haiti or Dominican Republic. But we've been doing it for a lot of years, and we're open to that, inviting you guys to be a part of those as well, and not just being our church. So those are some of the things that we're hoping to see with collectives: big churches, small churches, ones that are further along, helping the others. And then, as far as getting started, lots of prayer, asking God for people of peace, just like we do on the mission field. God, show us the ones that you've already been tugging at their heart for this mission stuff. Show us that lay person, show us that missions pastor, if they do exist in the city. Let me work my network that I already know of Christians around the city and see if their small group is already doing anything among the nations, or if their church has a missions committee. Do they do any short-term mission trips? And then just continue to follow the Spirit as he builds kind of a coalition and a collective of people that have a heart for the nations in their city.
Awesome.
Well, that's
How about
good.
you, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably say sign up, because we'd love to help and coach and encourage you along the way, however we can. Honestly, we'd love to just be praying for you. So that's step one. You don't have to do it, but we would be honored to. Step two is, so right now we're talking on you we think we're going to be able to do more together than alone. So don't just focus on an event right now. Focus on team building. So if you're listening to this, and all of a sudden you copy the URL, take screenshots of our website or ask us for social media stuff, whatever, but start making noise that you want to see a missions collective in your city, and share the why behind it, and share in social media, share at church, share with all your friends, and then start sharing with other churches. Call and ask who the missions pastor is, find out who the missions nerds are. Ask your new missions nerds friends who other missions nerds friends are.
Right.
See if there's ever been a perspectives class. Find out who those coordinators are. I mean, you just run at team building.
Yeah.
And just know that you might get way more people saying no than yes, for all the reasons that you heard when we talked about the challenges around it. Yeah. But the reason you're doing it, even though you might have some rejection, is because you feel like God's put this burden on your heart. We're not looking to be a new brand that's growing. Our heart, all three of us, for anyone listening, is we just believe this is a tool that is useful and can be leveraged by people in cities where they want to see more movement happening with missions. That
Yeah.
being said, like leverage everything we have and use this as a tool to do this in your city. And if you need to modify it, modify it. We meet monthly. They meet less often for, less big, like they do a bigger event, but less frequently. Like figure out a way that works for you all. So
Yeah.
focus on team building. And then you might be in a small town and it might be you and one other person at the end of the day. And I think you're gonna have to just prayerfully consider, like, when do you kind of hit pause on trying to
Mhm.
recruit for team building where you feel like you kind of exhausted it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And then at that point, those whom God has given you, even if it's only just you, like there comes a point where you hit pause and now you focus
Yeah.
on the like mobilizing event. And it might be as simple as like, hey, I have a missionary coming into this coffee house in this date, and you just tell everyone in the town that they're going to be there. If they can't speak at the church, like you might have, like you have them at your house and
Yeah.
invite everyone, and
Well,
and
it
like,
reminds it reminds me of a phrase that a mentor gave to me years ago, a good friend of mine, and we'll probably end on this note. And this, I've never said this to either of you, so sorry for
okay,
that. But he said, if something is worth doing, it's worth doing even badly,
yeah,
which simply means get this standard of perfection out of your head and start somewhere small. So yeah, my encouragement to you guys that are watching this video, reach out to us and say, I don't know where to start. Great. Let's pray with you and we'll walk with you through that. So for those of you that have taken time to watch this video, we're grateful. Hope it was helpful to you. And drop us an email, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and what God is doing in your context.